All right, moving rapidly along the highway of learning. We're in chapter 6 of How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. We're going to look at, so this would be slide number 17. They call this an exegetical sampling. Okay, so as with the epistles, the contextual questions that we must repeatedly ask of the book of Acts are these. What's the point of the narrative or the speech? What's the point? Number 2, what does it function in Luke's total narrative? And number 3, why has he included it here? Okay, those are good questions to ask. In other words, Luke was very intentional in what he was attempting to do. So overlooking these principles that we just talked about here, you'll miss some things. So if you go to slide number, 18. Okay, he just gives an example here, the choosing of the 7. Okay, the 7 leaders in Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Okay, how does this section function in the overall picture? Okay, it first serves to conclude the first panel, chapter 1 through 6. In other words, showing that the growth of the church required that a group of 7 should be chosen to oversee this food distribution. Okay. It transitions to the second panel. Luke's interest at the onset is to give a picture both of the life of the primitive community and of its expansion within Jerusalem. The concluding moment of the narrative includes both of these features. It also hints at the first tension within the community itself, a tension based on traditional lines within Judaism between Jerusalem, which were Aramaic-speaking Jews, and the diaspora. These are the Greek-speaking Jews. Okay, so in other words, you got two different languages. Okay, two different versions of Judaism, if you will. I don't know if versions is the best word, but because of their language differences and because of their cultural differences, there were friction. Again, anytime a church grows, you're probably going to have some form of friction. What happens if you take a traditional conservative church and suddenly you got a bunch of people in tats, right, coming to the church service, people dressed in flip-flops and shorts and tank tops or all kinds of tattoos, or perhaps they have objectionable language on a t-shirt, but they came to church? What are you going to do? Kick them out because they don't comply to some standard you have? Or do you welcome them, realizing that, hey, let's let the Holy Spirit clean them up. Let's welcome them. But again, we're not going to condone a lifestyle. We're not necessarily going to condone a t-shirt or something, or even a tattoo. But the point is, let's let the Holy Spirit clean them from the inside. Let's not get all legalistic here and start imposing values on them, okay? These are some of the challenges that you see in the book of Acts that every growing church is going to have to deal with. In other words, I love those kinds of problems. I mean, they can be problems, but to me, those are the good problems, okay? Instead of wrestling with, gosh, I hope enough people come to church this morning, we deal with, hey, where are we going to find enough people to seat in the sanctuary? Or what are we going to do about parking? Or what do we do with all these new people that are coming in? And suddenly now you got these rough and tumble teenagers coming into the youth service. And now all of the Christian parents are freaking out because they're worried about their kids are going to get, corrupted by these non-believing kids that are coming to church, right? To me, those are good problems to work through, okay? That's what they're dealing with here in the book of Acts, okay? So if you go to slide number, 19, he moves on here in his explanation. In the church, the tension between the Hellenistic Jews, the diaspora Jews, and the Jerusalem Jews, it was overcome by an official recognition of the leadership that had begun to emerge among the Greek-speaking Jewish Christians, okay? By digging into Bible dictionaries regarding words such as deacons and Hellenists, we discover the following few facts. Okay, first of all, the Hellenists were most certainly Greek-speaking Jews, that is, Jews from the diaspora who had returned to live in Jerusalem. Number 2, many Hellenists returned to Jerusalem in their later years to die there and to be buried near Mount Zion. Since they were not native to Jerusalem, when a man died, which many of them were, the widow had no regular means of sustenance. That's what was going on here that the apostles had to wrestle through, okay? So if you go to the next slide there, that would be what? Slide number 20. These widows were thus cared for, okay, by daily subsidies, okay, care that caused a considerable economic strain in Jerusalem. Okay, let's just take our church. Let's say there was an influx of, I don't know, I'll just make this up, like 30 widows in the church who had no, again, think it through. There's no social security, okay? The modern state entitlement system had not been created and wouldn't be created for almost 1900 years after this. So what would happen? You didn't have a family member to be able to take care of these widows, so the church had to. So let's just say the church suddenly now had to deal with, I don't know, an additional $10,000, $15,000 a month of taking care of all these widows. What would you do? Okay, these are some of the issues they were working through. Okay, number 4 here. It is clear that from the Stephen narrative, chapter 6, verses 8 through 15, that the Hellenists had their own Greek-speaking synagogue, of which both Stephen and Saul, who were from Tarsus, were members. 5, the evidence of the narrative in Acts 6 is that the early church had made considerable inroads into the synagogue. Note the mention of their widows, the fact that all 7 chosen to handle these matters have Greek names, and the fact that the intense opposition to the church comes from the diaspora synagogue, okay? So in other words, the church really chooses to be the bigger person in that they actually allow outsiders to basically become insiders and take on leadership, okay? That was a significant, I'll be the bigger man decision by the early church there, okay? In other words, they could have had the Greek-speaking, the Aramaic-speaking Jews be the deacons, okay, the leaders, but they didn't. They chose from the outside. Again, that is a very Christ-like, laying down your life type of a decision. Again, reflecting the changing character that's going on within these Christians, okay? Number 6, it is also important to note that the 7 men are never called deacons. They're simply called the 7. In fact, I even slipped up. I just called them deacons. They're called the 7. In other words, it was not meant to be a model for all time, okay? They oversee the food subsidies, okay? And then if you go to slide number 21, in the succeeding narrative in chapter 6, verse 8 through 8, chapter 8, verse 1, Luke focuses on one of the 7 men as a key figure in the first expansion outside Jerusalem. He specifically tells us that Stephen's martyrdom is the result of this, okay? So you'll realize that Greek-speaking Jews are an important part of God's larger plan. Again, showing the gospel moving from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria. Again, moving always outward, okay? God is always trying to reach the outsider. Always trying to reach the outsider. They are forced to leave Jerusalem because of persecution, but since they are not native there anyway, they simply go out and share the word throughout Judea and Samaria, okay? So the opening narrative of Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, is not given to tell us about the first organization of the church and about clergy and about lay deacons. It functions to set the scene for the first expansion of the church outside of its Jerusalem base. Again, think in terms of church growth. Think in terms of all these outsiders coming in. What do you do? How do you address some of these issues? Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. Okay, and we'll resume with slide number 22.